Is JK Rowling a national treasure after the BBC's SNP leadership hustings where Ash Regan and Kate Forbes both said she was? I was asked to appear on the Jeremy Vine show to discuss JKR, the GRR, Gender Recognition Reform Act, and trans prisoners. This is actually her channel. Can't really show it because... like looking kids dead in the eye and shaking his junk around, shaking his ass, which to me is incredibly inappropriate. She was playing defense for it before finally kind of acquiescing a little, which rubbed me the wrong way completely. She's not the worst trans rights activist I've seen talk on these kind of shows, do these debates, but she really doesn't know what she's doing, in my opinion. But anyway, we're gonna see what she has to say about JK Rowling. I'm sure it's gonna be absolutely fascinating, maybe informative as to how a candidate she was managing, despite her own issues, managed to get done for shitting on JK Rowling publicly. Here we go.
Is in the name, right? Sloughing around? Yeah, welcome back. Thanks for being with us this morning. Aisha, Christopher are here too. Let's remind you what's still coming. In a moment is Harry Potter author JK Rowling, a national treasure. We're taking your calls. We're asking because she's come up in the Scottish National Party's leadership contest.
Here's the thing. You can't compliment JK Rowling in front of trans people. They don't like it very much. You shouldn't say anything nice about JK Rowling ever if you want to be part of the trans cult. And if you do, that's probably grounds by itself to throw you out.
Olympic legend Sir Steve Redgrave is rowing his way here as we speak. Then Storm joins us with Jeremy Vine Extra. She'll be with Jasmine Dottie Waller and Carol Malone. And if you want to get in touch, the number is 02078622222. All right? Landline, we love, 16p a minute. Mobile, not so much, because sometimes the voice cuts out and they can cost more. You can also type Jeremy Vine on 5 into Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, or TikTok. And we are on TikTok. Now, your calls on whether JK Rowling is a national treasure, 02078622222. And she's come up, this is such a story to explain, isn't it? She's come up in the SNP leadership thing as part of a live debate. There are 3 candidates, they all want to be the next leader. Let's have a look.
Is JK Rowling a national treasure?
Yes, and I do think she's brave.
Do you disagree with her on the issue of transgender rights?
No, I don't disagree with her.
You don't disagree with her, so you back her on that. Ash?
I think she's a national treasure, yes. I think she was very brave to speak out on an issue where many women who had raised legitimate concerns were receiving, quite threatening communications. So yes, she's definitely a national treasure.
Okay.
And Hamza Yousaf's question was much more equivocal. Yeah. So J.K. Rowling, 57, one of Britain's most successful authors of all time. 600 million copies, right? So the way she comes into the Scottish National Party race is this. She lives in Scotland.
Oh, this was around when Hamza Yousaf ultimately took over, the First Minister... Ultimately took over the First Minister of Scotland position. He was very, pro self-ID, making it much easier to identify as a gender legally, things like that, was incredibly unpopular. There's someone else in now, he ended up resigning, and part of it was the Scottish Greens breaking up that government because it was an alliance government between the SNP and the Greens in the first place, and it was over some kind of climate change thing. It seems like they're on the same side, but again, all of these parties are very complicated because you've got the woke crowd and you've got the not woke crowd, basically. You've got the pro-trans and anti-trans side, to put it in incredibly simple terms, because I don't see it as pro-trans and anti-trans, but that's how a lot of people do see it. And it's causing a lot of complicated stuff going on, not just in these parties, even in British Labour. There's a huge rift in there, both of whom want Keir Starmer to be more pro their side. And he seems to be kind of falling somewhere in the middle and not really landing it, but I don't know what I would do in that situation. Whatever he does, he loses. So, and the hope is, maybe he'll get elected despite that. That's kind of what will probably happen. Let's be honest, because trans rights isn't actually that important of a thing. Whoever wins, they're not going to be throwing shit tons of money at the trans problem, because trans people are such a small minority of the population, and lots of them aren't voting Labour because they're too far left anyway, and they vote Green or they don't vote at all, and they shit on Keir Starmer endlessly on social media, similarly to how they do with JK Rowling, because of a bunch of different, little, it's a death by 1,000 cuts type thing. So not easy to prove, and, when you ask the average trans cultist on Twitter why exactly they think Starmer is transphobic, you're getting a huge long list of, well, he said this that suggests that he wants to preserve single-sex spaces, for example. So the jury's out. Ultimately, we're not really influencing anything anyway. Not in the way we want to. In the way we don't want to, probably in spades. But let's keep going.
And she's very angry with the SNP's policy on gender identity. So she says, here's a tweet, I stand in solidarity with 4 women in Scotland and all women protesting and speaking outside the Scottish Parliament. She doesn't like the idea that a person who's biologically male can wake up one day and decide that they are a woman. That's fundamentally her issue with it. Next one.
I actually more or less agree with that. People call me a woman because people use woman in different ways. That's kind of how it is. You know, again, our population is incredibly divided on this issue. But ultimately, you know, I'm born male. I don't cover that up. A lot of trans people do try and cover that up. A lot of trans people do try and pretend that their birth sex isn't what it is. I don't see the point in that. Like, that's delusional thinking.
Let's have a look. I don't know how many of these we've got. People who menstruate. So she's now taken exception because in the NHS, somebody stopped using the word woman and used the word people who menstruate. She says, I'm sure there used to be a word for those people. Was it wumban, wimpund, woman? So
people who menstruate. As a born male, I feel like I couldn't possibly push that kind of terminology on women myself. And I don't like a lot of the push for gender neutral stuff. I think it is erasing to a lot of people. You know, a lot of trans people do kind of gender themselves in the traditional way that people do, as in male or female. I don't see the point in getting rid of that. I don't see the point of stirring up gender altogether and turning it into grey nothingness, because that's what it comes across as to me. But hey.
There we are. That's the criticism of the lack of the word women. JK Rowling says, if sex isn't real, there's no same-sex attraction. If sex isn't real, the lived reality of women globally is erased. I know and love trans people, but erasing the concept of sex removes the ability of many to meaningfully discuss their lives. And she called Nicholas...
I agree with that as well. I agree with plenty of stuff she says. I don't agree with all of it. I don't know that... Well, when it was happening at the time, I definitely didn't agree as much. And I was very much one of those people that's like, you know, why are you focusing on trans people so much? Like, why are you going on about a small subset of the population? And at the time, that seemed like a good point. But as time has gone on, it kind of seems like a lot of what she was saying has kind of come true. For example, nowadays, you know, autistic girls are the most likely people to end up becoming trans, to take on so-called transgender identity, you know? Whereas before it wasn't like that. Until recently, trans women, people like me, male to female, that was like the majority. I don't know to what extent the majority, but definitely the majority of trans people overall. It's completely the other way around now. And this is stuff she was literally warning about in her like original manifesto. It's wild. So, hey, I don't know. If the trans side was better, if we had better arguments, maybe I wouldn't be in this position, but it kind of seems like we don't. We just call her transphobic over and over again. We have so many people that tweet at her, have been tweeting at her for 4 years plus. To me, the whole thing is completely pointless. I don't know why you would tweet at JK Rowling, especially as the time she does reply, you're going to get a bunch of shit from the people that follow her, because there's some fucking rabid, insane people that follow her, for sure. Just like there's plenty of rabid, insane people that follow trans people, or are just trans people on the internet.
Sturgeon, this is the crucial thing. A destroyer of women's rights, Aisha.
So I take a deep breath for a wait for this, because this whole row has just become so toxic. It has become near impossible to have a nuanced, compassionate and common sense debate around the trans...
Based, I agree.
We could decide at what point we show the photo of Isla Bryson, which has become...
Yeah,
and by the way, debate is fucking necessary about this kind of shit. I'm sorry. If you disagree, it's probably because you want to shut these conversations down. Because if you were forced to have a conversation, you probably wouldn't be able to. That's why we see people like Frida Wallace, who just go on these things with the intent to disrupt and just make fools of themselves, because they're not there to have a conversation anyway. They're not there to contribute to a discourse or to try and get people to understand trans a little better. They're just there to shout about what they want to shout about, often being incredibly disrespectful to other people in the process. It doesn't make us look good. Heather Herbert, from what I've seen, she's more respectful and more professional, which is odd to say considering what we've talked about. However, she doesn't seem more knowledgeable. She seems like she kind of throws out the shit arguments that everyone does and then kind of half capitulates at the end when none of them work. But we're going to see what happens. I'm not saying that she's going to do this time. We'll find out.
A daily habit
was
here.
The absolute kind of, thing that sort of tried to... I mean... JK Rowling is an incredible woman. She's an incredible writer. You've gone through all her books, not just these books. She writes under another name as well and has written some amazing...
JK Galbraith
has written some amazing books. Her backstory in terms of the oppression she faced, she was a single mother. She had her own issues with domestic violence. I'm listening actually to a podcast at the moment called The Witch Trials of JK Rowling, and her kind of story about how she became this sort of writer. She's donated loads of money to great causes. But what's interesting is in this podcast, even using her own words, she said, I don't want to be on this pedestal. I don't think she herself wants to be this thing held up. She's like, I want to express my views on things. She has done that. She's got every right to express those views. There is a lot of toxicity around this debate. And I would say that... No, I don't think so. I don't want to be pushed into a yes-no kind of right-wrong thing. I think there is a middle ground throughout this. I
actually agree with that. I think there's a middle ground. That's kind of my whole point. I'm not just a trans person who agrees with the TERFs. I get called that constantly. I get called a bootlicker. I get told they're not going to spare me in some imaginary scenario in some Twitter trans heads where in 5 years' time, the TERFs are going to have us all against a wall and they're going to shoot us down with a fucking firing squad. Like, it's never going to happen. It's just never going to fucking happen. Even if that did happen, they'd have to fucking catch me first. And I know they're catching a hell of a lot of you people before they're fucking catching me. Yeah, so there's like a third position. There's a third position where you afford trans people dignity and respect. You're not calling them biological males because you can say women versus trans women. You don't have to capitulate to the crazy people who won't give an inch, who will accept nothing short of trans people don't exist anymore. That's the world we have to have. You absolutely can agree with shit that JK Rowling says, agree with other gender critical points, which I don't think gender critical is inherently transphobic. I think there's transphobic elements of it. In the same way, I don't think trans is inherently hateful. I think there's hateful elements within trans communities. Unfortunately, quite large elements, it kind of seems like, especially online. And it makes you wonder what the fuck, like, new trans people are supposed to do, because they either pretty much take on this new identity where they're part of the cult, or straight away, they're a new trans person and they went on the internet to try and find people because there's not that many trans people. And it turns out all of them are insane. So, like, what the fuck do they do then? You hope that they find a few sane people, or they just go back to being alone. And hey, how's that going to work out for them? Who knows? The trans side doesn't seem to care about those people at that point, because if you're not with them, you're against them. And that's insane to say about other trans people, in my opinion.
After the Equality Act, when I was in government, which sets out the law in terms of protecting single-sex spaces, which I think is really important. The Equality Act says you must not discriminate against trans people, but you must also you can protect single-sex spaces.
I mean, let's at this point see our picture of Isla Bryson.
I think another point towards there being a middle position. I keep saying third position, but I'm pretty sure that means like ultranationalism, so I'll try not to. I think another way that speaks to the middle position is that single-sex spaces, there are certain ones that are going to be very difficult to enforce, like toilets. And to me, it makes much more sense to accept that toilets is really more about how you look. The same way that pronouns, they're not used based on sex any more than they're used based on what you tell people to use, because it's not really up to you ultimately what comes out of someone's mouth. Like, it's more about how you look. Because realistically, that's the best way without having someone at the front of every toilet, checking your genitals, which is completely unrealistic. Companies are not going to want to pay for those people to do that job, should I say. You've got things like the third bathroom argument, like just give trans people their own bathroom, put in gender neutral toilets everywhere. Again, a company's going to want to pay to have that put in. Is the government going to pay for every single fucking business above a certain size to have third toilets put in? What happens when they can't? Like, what do they do then? To me, it just makes more sense to treat it as more of a gendered space than a sex-based space, because sometimes it's just more realistic to do that.
Which is when the whole thing blew up in Scotland. So this was a male rapist who then, most people would say...
Isla Bryson, I don't know if they're going to show the famous photo of her. She was a rapist, I believe. Yeah, it literally says on here. She was a rapist who, after doing those crimes, came out as trans. Looks like this. I really hope that the famous picture is going to appear, because it's going to completely illustrate why a lot of people talk about this person, apart from the fact that they did rapes on women and now want to be in a women's prison because they look like this, with a with a wig conveniently covering up all these very identifiable face tattoos.
Say pretended to be a woman to get into a women's jail.
I would agree with that.
And he blew the whole thing wide open. But maybe that's a really unfair example, Chris, to use.
Well, I mean,
I'm not going to show it. I have to find it because this is relevant. Sector, Here we go. So, like, that image by itself, does that not sum everything up? And how can you be a dysphoric person who is now trans, who presumably wants to reject their former malehood? How can you be that person who has your leggings literally showing the outline of your junk right there? That's insane to me. I don't know how the fuck anyone would be convinced that this person is trans. I could never go out looking like that. Like, it's insane to me. And this is far from the only example of a trans person who is perfectly happy for the outline of their penis to be prominently on show. Anyway, Isla Bryson, there you go. Rapist, now a trans woman, shouldn't be in female prison. Do I even think this person is a woman? I don't know. I don't care. I don't lose sleep over this person because they're a piece of shit, quite frankly. Anyway.
National treasure. I mean, you look at those books, look at the work, look at what she's done for charity. Yes, she is. And on the issue, I mean, she is trying to say, isn't she, that being a woman is hard. It can be hard, that all the changes you go through in your life, and it's hard for men to say they are suddenly women without going through that lived experience. That's part of it.
Well, look, there is,
and you can see
again, I have a lot of sympathy with what she kind of says, but this debate has become so toxic. On the other side of it as well, are trans.
She's repeating herself, but it's true. And it is true that it's toxic on both sides. Like, some of the gender critical people are fucking nuts, like savage, you know what I mean? And, you know, for someone like me, that works for me about as often as it works against me, because about half the time I'm completely drawing their ire because I disagree with them and because I'm trans. The other half of the time, they completely agree with me and it's the fucking trans people. So you can't win. Ultimately, if you're a trans person and you care about the truth, rather than just saying the same shit everyone else says, rather than just taking the cult mentality, absorbing it, becoming part of the cult, and losing yourself forever, that's just your fate. You're hated by plenty of the gender criticals. Not all of them. I think some of them are actually very reasonable people who have good points. And you're hated by plenty of the trans people, because there's not that many sane trans people on the internet, trust me. And something like gender critical is also going to be overrepresented in terms of how many extreme people are on the internet, because that's just the internet. That's how it is.
People who are now, because of the Isla Bryson thing, feeling frightened. They are vilified. They're not just laughed at, they're hounded in many ways. And I have seen, particularly online, the most horrible comments lobbed at both sides. I've seen death threats.
True.
Against JK Rowling, which is unacceptable. Her address has been given out to people. She's probably had to have more security. On the other hand, I've seen also people absolutely being horrible and violent.
By the way, you mentioned her address having to beef up security. There were like literally trans protesters a few years ago outside her house, which again, I think is way too far. I don't think you need to take that kind of thing to someone's literal house. Like, that's crazy. That's bordering on harassment. And it's kind of lucky in her case that she lives somewhere that has walls and shit like that, you know, huge property. You're not just, you know, someone like me, if someone was protesting outside my front door, they're, 20 feet away from me, something like that. But hey, if they're willing to do that to JK Rowling, who else are they willing to do that to? Will they be discriminatory, whether it's a rich person or a poor person? I personally don't think so.
People saying we don't want trans people, we should try and get rid of trans people.
Let's bring in Heather Herbert, a trans rights campaigner who is based in Aberdeen. And
there we go. Are we on normal speed? Yes, we are. Let's go. Heather Herbert, here we go. Thinks menopausal women should go on less dodgy sites that trans people are aware of if they want HRT. Will take pictures of themselves in a disabled toilet doing dilation and think that's a normal thing to do. Has had social media scandals. Yet, the person whose campaign she has now been running got deselected over a social media campaign. Who is her partner, by the way? The fact that there's not been a learning experience, and the fact that, you know, ultimately she's kind of let Sophie Molly down. I feel bad for Sophie in that situation, because Heather should have known better. Like, she's the one that seems to have more of a background for this kind of thing. I don't really know too much about Sophie's, like, background beyond, like, music and stuff, so... Anyway, let's see what Heather Herbert has to say about whether J.K. Rowling is a national treasure.
You've heard our panel talking there. I'll start by asking you if you think that J.K. Rowling is the national treasure.
You mean she's a dusty relic that should be locked up in a museum away from people? I think
There we go. How nice. How nice to say that about a human being. There we go.
that's a little bit harsh, to be honest.
Dusty relic that should be locked up in a museum away from people, in case you can't understand a word she says. I can, but I've spent a long time working on phones. So, hey, you get all sorts. You have to get used to listening carefully.
I think like Enid Blyton or Roald Dahl, she's written some really good children's books. Some really, personally, I loved her books growing up. But is she a national treasure? But if you're going to separate the art from the artist, then you're going to separate the art from the artist. Her children's stories definitely are. She's donated huge amounts of money for.
I feel like it seems weird to like completely abjectly shit on her and then lay out why people like her and stuff. I don't know. It seems weird to me. I think you'd be way more balanced sounding. When I watched, God, I have a couple of videos on someone called, what is her name? Shivani Dave. She was quite good at this actually, just kind of mitigating straight away, acknowledging what's right with the other arguments, instead of being like, well, she should be locked away in a museum, dusty old relic, like, bit ageist. Like, does this person look like someone who should be commenting on that kind of thing? I personally don't know, but hey. It seems weird to go that hard and then kind of pull it back.
For the likes of us, to charities, but she's also made transphobic statements that have played a part in rape crisis centres being pounded with loads of abuse.
I feel like there's a good 10 steps between whatever J.K. Rowling has said and what's been going on with rape crisis centres, which I think, there's been controversy about ones that allow trans people in because, rape crisis centres, people with penises coming into them when it's generally women that are the ones getting raped by people with penises, aka men. But I'm not calling her a man because I understand if I do, I will probably get called a hate criminal.
So when you say transphobic, she's expressed.
Yeah, what did she say that was transphobic? We've had at least one on my channel. I think it was Felix Fern. Someone literally asked him in what way is she transphobic, and he's like, "Oh well, if I could remember right now." It's oh my god. If we're so sure that J.K. Rowling is transphobic, should not so much someone like me, but shouldn't these activists have that shit on memory? Shouldn't that be in the fucking bank? But no, it's not, because it takes about 1 million years to explain why she's transphobic, if indeed she is. And we wonder why no one believes us. It's possibly because it's not true, I'm not sure, because I don't care that much, but hey, it's more about the actual conversation and the way that these trans activists handle them. That's more interesting to me.
Expressed her disagreement with the idea that a person can choose their gender, correct?
Yeah, so most trans people and most LGBT campaign groups would call her statements transphobic.
Right.
And as you say,
So most of them would call them. That's not evidence. That's just, well, other people also call her that. It's possible that a lot of people are very stupid.
In the podcast that she released recently, she knew that her statements were going to be inflammatory. She knew that it would upset.
Well, yeah, obviously. What year is this? 2023? Yeah, I think she noticed that this shit was inflammatory by now. Come on.
Her fans.
Okay, I will say that J.K. Rowling has denied being trans.
And like, what's the point exactly? So other people think she's transphobic, and she knew that this is inflammatory. Like what? So she shouldn't have said it? If it's inflammatory, does that mean it's not true? Does that mean you shouldn't say it? A lot of things are inflammatory to a lot of people. That doesn't mean they're not true. And I don't know why there's an idea that we should stop people from saying the truth if it's inflammatory, except that this person is going to say that everything she says is lies. Possibly. I don't know.
Transphobic, saying she respects every trans person's right to live any way that feels authentic and comfortable to them, and she wants trans people to be free from discrimination and abuse. So I should say, and actually, she's also separately, Heather, said that she loves trans people. So would you not say that when it all came to a head with that Isla Bryson, very unfortunate Isla Bryson case in...
Quite a few of these activists, their mentality is, if you have one position that's not entirely pro-trans, that's not positive towards trans people, say you don't think that trans women should be in with the women in sports, that makes you anti-trans. That's all it takes.
Scotland. And in that moment, she sort of won the argument.
She is destroying the trans side at this point. Like, for a couple of years, the tide seemed like it was against her, but as things have gotten weirder and weirder, as stuff that she's been saying has kind of been proven true, like, it's the tides have turned, and like, it seems like gender critical is gaining a lot of ground. And part of it is, like, this person I don't think is gender critical, but let's say she is, because it's kind of similar to the kind of representation you'd see of like gender critical. And again, you know, I've got loads of videos on this shit. This person is like very professional looking, very professional sounding. Most of these trans activists, this person isn't too bad, but most of them are not that at all. And again, I have a lot of evidence of this on my YouTube channel.
Trans people. So would you not say that when it all came to a head with that Isla Bryson, very unfortunate Isla Bryson case in Scotland, and
it's not really unfortunate, it's just a piece of shit that did piece of shit things and now calls himself trans. It's quite simple. You can call anyone you want a man. You can say about anyone, I don't fucking claim them. I don't fucking claim Isla Bryson. Fuck that shit.
In that moment, she sort of won the argument.
I don't think so.
So she hasn't won the argument according to Heather. Let's see why.
So I think there's been a lot of misinformation about the Gender Recognition Reform Act. This is slightly off topic, I know, but that act had no effect on Isla Bryson being in prison or which prison she went to or not. Prior to very recently, when Isla was.
I really hope she justifies that, but I don't think she's going to. These people often don't. They can say things that are difficult to meaningfully push back on, especially in a debate format, and it makes it difficult. And unfortunately, sometimes I see people, even Brianna Wu, who is someone that I agree with on some stuff, I've seen her say that, you know, for example, surgeries are not carried out on minors. Surgeries have been carried out on minors for the purpose of, like, what's the word I'm looking for? Gender affirmation since at least 2012, if not further back than that. But often what I find is that people claim that, and then the person on the other end of the argument doesn't know that that's not true, so accepts it. It's not true. Anyone that says it, never let them get away with that.
Was convicted, there was a risk assessment done, and the risk assessment said that she would be a danger to women prisoners, so she was put into a male prison.
Wasn't she initially put, hang on, I need to get better at, like, because the thing is, I can't predict what these people are going to say. Sorry, I'm just searching this because I don't trust this fucking person whatsoever. Women's prison, Isla Bryson. Prison bosses have defended the decision to send a trans woman rapist to be assessed in a women's prison. Oh, so she wasn't sent to the prison, but she was assessed there. She was initially held at Cornton Vale, Scotland's only all-female facility, during a 72-hour segregated assessment period before being moved to HMP Edinburgh. So she's leaving out a lot of, like, what she's saying isn't technically incorrect, but we're leaving out a fair amount of information that. Further concerns have also been raised over the case of violent prisoner Tiffany Scott, previously known as a man called Andrew Burns, who had an application to move to a women's prison approved. Critics argued vulnerable women prisoners, many of whom were victims of male violence, were being placed at risk. Tiffany Scott. Was this before it was Tiffany, though? Is that Andrew or Tiffany? I'm not sure. They've got the dyed hair, so there's at least a hint of what's coming, if nothing else. Yeah, in 2017. When did they change? Right. The Scottish government has been urged to block the transfer of a violent transgender prisoner from a male prison to a woman's jail. Okay, so wasn't entirely the case in this person's case. This person had their application approved. She was handed that sentence in 2013, the sentence to go to a male prison, presumably, after admitting stalking a 13-year-old girl by sending letters from her cell. What the fuck? In 2017, Falkirk Sheriff Court was locked down amid safety fears as Scott was sentenced over a series of violent incidents in Glenorchy Prison in Clackmannanshire. They included striking a prison nurse on her back with a hurled chair, so has attacked a woman, nice, punching a prisoner officer in the face, and spitting at another officer and trying to bite him. Someone that should be moved to a women's prison, apparently. So what I'm getting at here, basically, is it didn't happen in this Isla Bryson case, so she can kind of worm her way out of that because she was assessed in the women's jail and then ultimately sent to a man's jail. But you've got someone else who literally was approved to move to a women's jail, who has stalked a 13-year-old girl, who has attacked a female nurse. So hopefully we get deeper into this, because it very much feels like, because of the example, she's been able to worm her way out. Is she going to acknowledge that, irrespective of the example, this still happens? And what does she think of someone who was done for those things, including literal fucking noncery, whether they should be in a women's prison when they were born male? Let's see. Let's keep going.
Right, I understand, but the bigger picture surely is that as a result of Nicola Sturgeon's policies, people are able to change gender.
It wasn't even just as a result. I think that case came from years ago. So there was already a bit of a precedent set. So, hey.
If they want to. And that may be very, very healthy in 99.9% of cases. But there is often an outlying case, like the Isla Bryson one, which allows people to argue very strongly against it.
What I'm going to predict here, we will hear what she says, but what I'm going to predict is, well, it needs to be done case by case. That doesn't mean no trans people should be in women's prisons. I'm going to guess that's the case. What I'd like is more examples that do show the problem, because Isla Bryson is borderline, you know? And I don't agree with what Heather Herbert said. I think she's deliberately omitting some facts here, but it doesn't even matter because there's other people that literally make the argument better than Isla Bryson does anyway.
People can change gender whenever they want. All the Gender Recognition Reform Act would allow trans people to change their birth certificates. So, for example, my birth certificate says male. If I die, or when I die, and if I get married, my death certificate and my marriage certificate will have to say male.
Should you have female on your birth certificate when you literally weren't born female?
Recognition Reform Act just allows that to be noted as female. It doesn't grant any more rights. It doesn't allow anything else to happen.
Understood. Stay with us, Heather. Holly's in London. Holly, do you think JK Rowling is the national...
I'm going to be honest. Jeremy Vine's question now is a bit shit. With the framing it through the Gender Recognition Act is, again, it gives her an easy out. It feels extremely slimy, but the problem is a guy like this doesn't necessarily know much about trans rights activists, doesn't necessarily have all the examples there. But the problem is, these trans activists, they don't talk to people who might like drill them down on this and actually try and get an answer. Do you know what I mean?
National treasure.
Yes, I do. I think before she's an author and a wonderful philanthropist, she's a British citizen and she's got a right to her opinion. Her job should not deflect from that. Also, she pays loads in tax to this country, so I think we need to show her a bit of respect. Also, I think trans rights need to be respected as well, but just because the trans person is making changes in their life, I will accept their new pronouns and things like that, but I'm not making changes to my life. I'm a woman. I want to use women's toilets with women. So get separate toilets, gender-neutral toilets.
The gender-neutral toilet, I already mentioned this, is not a good argument because what business is going to want to have to put in new toilets? Is it going to be at their cost? Is it going to be at the government's cost? Are the taxpayers going to be happy about having to fund shit tons of new gender-neutral toilets? What would happen if the place doesn't have the space, doesn't have the resources to have a gender-neutral toilet, and it has to just be male and female? You know, it's a non-starter. And again, that speaks to, it's more about what you look, it's more of a gendered space. And ultimately, if you've got your dick out in a female toilet, in a place where people can see it, you're already doing it wrong, and you should not be in that space at all. Like, that's completely inappropriate, like point blank. That's just how it is. As a trans person, you respect the spaces as a guest. That's the best way I can put it. You're not one of them. You look the part. You show respect for the space. You show respect for the people that are in it. You don't do anything that's going to draw attention to yourself. You use it strictly for what it's there for. And that's, to me, that's the best way of solving it.
Let's see how Heather responds to that.
Nothing in the GRR affects the Equality Act.
That's a bit.
She's hard on this GRR thing now. It's clear that there's a lot more implications than just the GRR, and that we want society structured in a certain way. I say we, I don't want it structured in a certain way. I'm fine with like biological sex being important. I think biological sex is more important than your gender. I don't know why gender identity, which I don't know that I believe in anyway, I don't know why that trumps sex, especially when it comes to certain things like women-only spaces where women might be uncomfortable with men being in them. When it comes to sports, where the physicality is literally a huge factor in it. Almost no sports are like evenly matched with men and women. For the most part, sports are male-dominated because men are bigger and stronger. How can gender, or gender identity, if that's what you want to call it, how can that trump sex in those kind of scenarios?
I would still use...
Heather, sorry, Holly's saying she's a woman who wants...
She doesn't even understand what she's fucking talking about. That's great. That's great. I'm glad... You know, how many trans people could be, like, on these kind of shows? We get Heather Herbert. Great. The only reason it's not worse is because it's not fucking Frida Wallace or someone like that, who is literally the worst of the worst when it comes to these people.
Wants to use toilets with women, by which I think
you can do that now. You've been able to do that for a long time. You've been
True.
able to do that for a long time in the law.
How does this person have more of a handle on what's going on than the fucking trans person? Hey, listen. When trans people assert that their being trans is their expertise, or that they can infer other things based on their experience and map that onto other people's experience, is bullshit. Often trans people are the worst people to ask about trans issues because of the incredible bias, because of how much propaganda floats around, and how easily trans people are manipulated into becoming part of this bizarro cult that I don't know what it serves at this point. It seems to be about queering fucking society, which almost no one wants, by the way. Most people are fine with men and women being themselves and having differences, and even the aesthetic of like queerness to me is often bizarre. I don't understand androgyny for the sake of it. I don't understand when you've got someone like Sam Smith wearing some like super elaborate outfit. Let me see if I can find an example of what I'm talking about. Yeah, this kind of look. I don't understand this whatsoever. I don't know why this looks good to anyone. He is completely in his right to look however he wants, but to me this is an example of like androgyny for its own sake. He's wearing an effeminate clothing, but you know, the neck up, that's just a guy. There's like body hair. How does that improve the look? You've got full beard, hasn't been shaven for days. How does that improve the look? It feels like it's for its own sake. And I have no hate towards Sam Smith. I don't listen to their music, but I don't understand. This is just an example of this, you know, gender neutral. Oh, here's the one. Here's the one that, like, I don't get this. Oh, please allow it. Okay. Accept. This is painful. I need to find a quicker way of doing this. Yeah, another example. Like, again, no hate to Sam Smith. They can look however the fuck they want. It doesn't affect me in any way. I just don't understand it. I don't understand the push for androgyny when it just doesn't look good. Like, this is a bizarro outfit with just a guy's head sticking out the top. Like, what am I supposed to take from this? Is there any coherence to this apart from that it's all one color? I don't get it. But hey, tangent over. Let's go back to
Holly. That's a bit technical.
I would still use...
Heather, sorry. Holly's saying she's a woman who wants to use toilets with women, by which I think
you can do that now. You've been able to do that for a long time. You've been able to do that for a long time in the law.
Holly, there's no issue here apparently.
I think people are getting very, very sensitive and a bit scared to approach this subject, particularly in the workplace. And
True, because trans people get offended. Listen, desensitize yourself a bit to anti-trans arguments, desensitize yourself a bit to transphobia, desensitize yourself to the kind of shit people are going to say about you because you're trans. Work in a fucking Weatherspoon. Get on the bar. You know? Because these people are not going to do shit to you. And you realize it's kind of benign in a lot of ways. You can talk about the harm that it causes overall, but to yourself, it's benign. And you have nothing to gain from being deathly afraid of the fucking T-slur or whatever shit.
Things like this. My point is, just because a trans person is making changes in their life, I will acknowledge new pronouns, new names, things like that. But you will not force me into making other changes, and I will not tiptoe around you.
How about that, Heather?
Fine,
Well, the GRR says this. No, I'm kidding.
whatever. I'm not
Fine, whatever. Nice.
asking you. I wouldn't ask her to make any changes. The law is
Holly,
a law, and it's been so since 2010.
Holly, you don't have to make changes that are that big, do you? I know.
The law is the law, but generally in a business, their rules are you shouldn't be going in the women's toilet if you're a man.
I'm a bloke saying this, so it's difficult for me.
No, I know, like Marks and Spencer said, made the changing rooms gender neutral and things like that. I don't shop in Marks and Spencer's anymore because I don't think it's appropriate. Look at the case of Isla Bryson,
We've done that.
offender, and if he was outside, he would be using the women's toilet, changing.
That's a point they haven't really addressed. This is a huge... I wish, there was time in these debates to, actually flesh anything out, because, I mean, by the time Heather Herbert appears, it's, halfway through the video. There's not much time for actual debate. So again, it's easier to worm your way out, and a huge part of me, this is conspiratorial as fuck, and I don't know that I'm true. I don't know that I'm saying anything true here, but it's my gut feeling. She knows that in these kind of debates, it's easy to weasel your way out and not really answer too much of anything. Whereas if they were sitting with someone like me on a stream where you've got an hour or two, I feel like these people would not engage in these kind of conversations. It's rare that you see a longer form debate that isn't just internet shit that fucking Destiny or whoever was doing 3 years ago, you know? The one exception I've really seen so far is the Frida Wallace conversation at, what was it? I can't remember what it's called. She had a debate with Helen Joyce, talked about her penis, said weird sex shit, and then complained about sexualization, pissed off even fucking Peter Tatchell, who's the most soy guy ever, according to his Twitter at least, is mad. So maybe short debates are all trans people can actually handle, who knows?
Rooms, things like that. Not safe, don't like it. If these companies want to follow this sort of trend at the moment, then they need to create gender neutral spaces and let the customer, the consumer, make the choices where they want to go.
We've drifted a little bit off, I suppose, off Rowling and the SMP.
Yeah, that's the other thing. These things almost never stay even remotely on topic, although is JK Rowling a national treasure is a pretty shit question, so I don't entirely blame Heather Herbert here. But it goes off topic so quickly because trans activists love to throw out new topics like this, especially when being and I appreciate this person hasn't really done this, especially when being well, why aren't we talking about this, that, or the other, the things that they want to talk about, which, usually there are conversations going on, you've just joined the wrong conversation then, I guess. But yeah, it goes so far off topic, it's so difficult to follow, and I don't know, I wouldn't trust this person further than I can throw them. I think that they're kind of playing up to the weaknesses of this particular format, in my opinion.
Yeah.
But thank you, Holly.
JK Rowling is fantastic, and we need to show her more respect.
Thank you. Just for a second on the SNP leadership race, which I know feels like a distance away. It is interesting, isn't it? Because Kate Forbes is definitely there, and Humza Yousaf is there, and Ashri.
What ended up happening was Humza Yousaf won. He was the most woke one. He tried to push through gender reforms, getting self-ID pushed. It was vetoed by the UK government, the English government, which, Westminster, it presides over the whole UK, pretty much. So the Scots want to do something, they still have to go through, currently Rishi Sunak, And then there was another thing, he got through some bill, trying to tackle hate crimes, which I think a lot of people found draconian, anti-free speech and so on. He was deeply unpopular. Eventually the Scottish Greens stabbed him in the back, which is interesting because he was fairly far left by politician standards in this country, in the UK, should I say. Yeah, it was a whole shit show. It kind of seemed like he fucked it up. And who knows what's going to happen. They've got their own election as well as us. Sophie Molly's running as a independent candidate. This person is managing her campaign. It's going to go horribly wrong because these people don't have a clue what they're doing. Let's just see the rest of this thing.
Speaking, I'm not sure about. And I don't know who's going to win it.
I think Kate Forbes is...
Ash Regan,
I think she's going to win.
Ash Regan will decide.
Oh, they've both... Oh no, he's saying Ash Regan will decide. This person's wrong. Kate Forbes didn't win. Kate Forbes was what this person would call a TERF, gender critical, whatever. Yeah, the woke guy won. Because
her votes will go to the winner, and I guess that's going to be.
I think Kate Forbes.
Yeah, they're both wrong then. Shit. Let's see what Heather says. Maybe she's like a savant when it comes to predicting next SNP leaders, which is a super useful thing to be able to do, I'm sure. Let's go.
Because Hamza Yusuf is this continuity Sturgeon candidate.
Who are you supporting here?
Yeah. Sturgeon was like super woke as well, and then Hamza Yusuf was and then Hamza Yusuf was also super woke, and he won.
Heather?
I don't get a vote. I'm not a member of the SNP. I'm in the Green Party.
Oh, what a cuck. Yeah, but this person is going to be like the First Minister of Scotland. At least answer the question, you loser. Maybe she does. Hey.
Who are you supporting?
I'm not supporting either Ash or Kate.
Okay.
Why not just say, oh my god, why are these people so slimy? Even over like the slightest, I appreciate I'm soying out literally nothing, but it just does my head in. They're so slimy when it comes to actual questions. And then when asked a fairly innocuous thing about who do you think's going to be the next First Minister of Scotland, based on the fact that there's a fucking by-election or whatever the fuck it was called. Oh, well, I'm not supporting the ones that aren't this one. I'm not going to mention him by name. Like, what is this? What is this? Stop being such a fucking cuck. I'm sorry, I'm going way too far with this, but it just irritates me. We don't need to constantly find the most difficult way of answering every question ever when it's such a simple and ordinary question. Like, what, are you worried that weirdos are going to give Hamza Yusuf shit because you support him? People gave him a lot of shit anyway because people don't want the woke shit as much anymore, and that's what he was all about. And people were fed up with Nicola Sturgeon, who I think had a bunch of scandals about tax or some shit, I don't know. Yeah, it was a whole shit show. He's not even there anymore.